5 days before the winter storm hit, the ERCOT CEO assured ERCOT, and I quote, "We're ready for the cold temperatures coming our way."
CPS Energy is going to continue to analyze its performance, how we did.
To the companies, to Texas leaders, what message would you tell them?
That they don't care. They don't care what you go through, you know, and I'm very disappointed with CPS.
Welcome to Breakdown. It's been almost 1 year since the deadly winter storm hit Texas. Who could forget what that was like? Hundreds of thousands of people in Bexar County literally left in the dark, and hundreds died across Texas.
Now, since that weather event, both CPS Energy and ERCOT have made changes to address what happened. But the question remains, will those changes be enough to prevent another major blackout? That's exactly what we're going to discuss today.
We've dealt with freezes since last year. Last week, Governor Greg Abbott talked about the state power grid. He said we didn't have to worry about cold weather causing widespread power outages. The governor credited the many changes that ERCOT has implemented. Listen.
As compared to last year, Texas has about 15% more power generation capacity. There is also more reserve power available than last year. Unlike last year, winterization has been required for power generators, and there's been about 99% of those power generators passed inspection. Last year, some generators were not available because of maintenance operations during the course of the winter storm. This year, more generators are online because they were required to do maintenance either before or after a winter season.
Now let's get specific now. Here are the changes that CPS Energy has made since last year. The biggest one is the 3.85% increase, the rate increase that was approved just last month. We told you all about that. CPS Energy says that that money is going to help maintain infrastructure, and the increase goes into effect next month. Also, company officials say that they've spent around $2 million to winterize their natural gas plants. They've also invested in temporary enclosures, and they're using more insulation, heaters, and radiant heating on pipes at the plants.
And continuing with those CPS Energy changes, he's a man who takes over the city's power company, a company that's seen its share of controversy and plunging approval ratings. Interim President and CEO Rudy Garza. We discussed in depth the changes made by both CPS Energy and SAWS and how he plans to win the citizens' trust back. Now,
Garza also spoke with us about the lawsuits between CPS and ERCOT and the utility's natural gas suppliers. He also reflected on the changes that the energy company has faced during last year's winter storm. Wow.
As you know, there's been a lot of discussion about what happened a year ago with the power failures, the loss of water, how it affected so many San Antonians. What has CPS Energy learned from that experience?
We learned a lot. I mean, we've had so many community, committees, quite frankly, the city's Committee on Emergency Preparedness, Municipal Utilities Committee, our own board, and customers who've all provided feedback of some type. And what we know is there are things that, that we don't control that, had implications for, the February storm. That the state has dove into, and we've been parts of those conversations. And then we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community. What we know is that we needed to do more, weatherization of our power generation, infrastructure. We needed to do more. We needed to look at our load shed program differently. We never contemplated an event of that scale. So we've gone back in. And really, reprogram that to make sure we can, we can meet that type of catastrophic event, and communication. We know that while we worked hard to try to put the information out last, storm that we could, we know that customers want information differently, and more than anything, I think today you will see, the city, SAWS, CPS Energy, the county, all emergency responders really coming together to speak with one voice to make sure that the information getting out to the community is consistent and usable.
You don't know what the future holds just as far as weather events. We can all talk about things that are out of our control, but as far as the things that are in your control, is there a firm protocol that CPS Energy has established now in the event that we do get another?
Yes, there's absolutely a firm protocol. We are standing up what we call our incident response team almost immediately when the threat of weather, is imminent. And, forecasts change, and we recognize that, we have to be flexible. But internally, I will tell you that the sense of urgency in making sure that we're paying attention to the things that will help us do the best job we can do for our community is what's really important. So even outside of the work we do coming together, with the city to start planning for a potential event, we're making the call to stand up, those teams that will help us be, the best we can be earlier.
So what does that mean? So I assume you guys also watch the news and you have forecasts. Sure. And you know what's going to happen, right, weather-wise. So as soon as you have that forecast, do you activate something? Well,
it depends on what the forecast tells us. In this case, the forecast was telling us it's going to get really cold, so we knew it was going to be in the 20s. What we were less certain about was the precipitation that was going to come with it. And so once we recognized that precipitation was dipping down a little further south, it changes our need to respond. The cold isn't so bad. The cold we feel like we're in a pretty good position to manage.
I think there's no doubt that ERCOT obviously deserved the scrutiny and the criticism that they got a year ago. CPS Energy has also received scrutiny and criticism from what happened a year ago. Is that deserved?
I think some of it is, absolutely. I think that, look, our employees, we're here to serve our customers. And so I think that from my standpoint, it's an issue of intent. Did we intentionally, fail our community? Of course not. There's nobody that takes it harder when our customers have a bad experience than me and my leadership team and my managers, who all came up through the organization, have been here for 20, 30 years, that have been committed to serving this community. We're public servants at the end of the day, just like other governmental entities around town. And so we always, whether we get criticism or not, from the community, we will always look at our response and determine what we can do better, and we'll do that after every single event.
It didn't seem, though, that was communicated. Am I correct in that? Like, it didn't seem like in the moment when people were without power and then without water, that there was a communication from CPS Energy to the customers.
Well, what the customers wanted to know is when is it going to be over? And that's the one thing we couldn't tell them. Again, I think we've got different insight these days into what's going on, across the rest of the state. Even going into an event, I knew that we had 83,000 megawatts of power available, and we knew that the peak was probably going to be somewhere around 71,000 megawatts. It was actually closer to 69. So even the response from the other generators across the state, we have more insight into that now. We didn't have that last February. I think our collective cooperation, I think, really has showed out these last couple of events where we've made a lot of really positive changes.
Well, I've noticed the changes in just as a customer in the emails that have gone out. Like, we're expecting this to happen. X could happen, would lead to Y, which would lead to Z. I mean, that seems to be one of the major changes just in communications that you guys have made. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're absolutely right. We have made a huge change in our overall approach to communication. And here's what we've done. Since February, we've been on a campaign to get our customers to actually go into our system and update their information. Now you'll get a box on your Manage My Account system that says which number do you want to designate as your emergency contact, and that's the number that we're going to utilize, to let customers know that there's something going on that they need to be paying attention to.
Okay, so you mentioned communication as far as emails and texts. What about all your customers who don't have email, your older customers who don't have access to those?
So we're utilizing we're utilizing the city and county's ability to get to those most vulnerable. We actually have, well, those most vulnerable meaning there are services provided by the community that have folks that they will reach out to the community that they serve. So we partner with close to 200 agencies across the city, to try to broadcast our message broadly. But I will tell you, where we do have some work to do has to do with those customers that are on critical care equipment. We've only got about 3,000 customers who actually have told us they've got an oxygen machine or a dialysis machine or some life-sustaining equipment in their homes. Customers have to tell us that they've got that type of situation, and we'll actually do specific outreach. We've actually got that capability, but customers have to tell us that that they have equipment of some kind that we need to be paying attention to.
So can you guarantee to those 3,000, you mentioned 3,000 customers who have let you know that they are on dialysis or some sort of essential equipment, that CPS will be there for them in the event that power goes out?
Our protocol is if we suspect that those customers are going to be out an extended period of time, for us that's over 4 hours, we will call them in the middle of the event asking them if there's something we can do to get them to a safe place.
Where are we with the lawsuits? I know that CPS Energy sued some of the energy providers because for the perceived price gouging. Obviously, it seems like price gouging to the average San Antonian. Where are we? I know some settlements have been made. Are you anticipating that there will be a settlement?
Well, we're settling some of those cases on a daily basis, Steve. We filed 18 lawsuits, give or take, with suppliers all over the state of Texas. We're still in litigation with ERCOT because we believe ERCOT made some fundamental mistakes that, kind of artificially held the price in the market up, longer than it should have. And nobody else is making that fight for the customers. We're making that fight for our customers, but the implications of our lawsuits will affect customers across the entire state of Texas. I mean, our lawsuits will dictate policy if we're successful in the future. There are probably 2 or 3 lawsuits that will likely need to be litigated to the fullest extent. Those are the lawsuits with the highest kind of at-risk dollars that for our counterparties. We're going to spend a significant amount of money litigating these cases, but we've also gotten significant value either in the settlements that we've reached for reasonable amounts of dollars or for services that we're going to have to buy anyway in the future. We'll be able to come up to what we call a commercial agreement and get something in return for that value of what the lawsuit was for. So our customers have already come out ahead at the end of the day.
Now, you mentioned that some of these lawsuits are still pending. So what if something happens and CPS winds up in a deficit? Will that be passed on to customers?
Well, we've had that conversation right after the rate case, and I know there's been some confusion about that. We're not going to dismiss any of the lawsuits. The lawsuits are either going to be settled or they're going to be litigated, and the courts will ultimately decide. When we set up that regulatory asset, we set it up for up to $1 billion, although we anticipate that number will be something less than that, obviously. For each year, we'll add up the additional settlements that we've made, and we'll go to City Council when we issue long-term debt to cover that expense. So again, what City Council has approved is the $418 million of what we have settled and/or come to commercial terms with our counterparties.
You have interim in front of your name right now. Do you want the permanent gig?
Steve, that is the $1 million question. What I want is for our board to run, a process. They've asked that question. I think they're, putting their ideas together on what the community wants in a new CEO. Certainly, it's a conversation that I'm having with the board, every day. But I have told them I'm going to be focused on, making sure that we stabilize the organization in the short term, and I'm going to let the board, run their process.
Because it's a much different job than it was
Absolutely.
2 years ago.
Absolutely.
I mean, our Fairfax poll has shown you went from 77% approval to 44, I believe it was, in the last one. Rightly or wrongly, there's a perception out there that has changed with CPS Energy. How do you get back?
Well, here's the funny thing. It's still the same people that are leading this organization. It's still the same folks out in the field that are serving our customers every day. We're the same company. You know, there are things that we can learn from February, and even these last two events that will make us better in the future. But we're the same company. We're the same company committed to our customers. We're the same company committed to being, the community-owned asset that, provides, a third of the city's budget. These are really, what we do is really important for San Antonio.
When people relive the events of last year, one of the things they say is, okay, yeah, it's one thing not having any power, but no water. So what has CPS done to work better with SAWS so that people don't lose their water next time?
Well, that was probably one of the biggest gaps in our response last February is really on both of our parts, both CPS Energy and SAWS, identifying each other's critical infrastructure, within our own systems to make sure that we're providing service to critical infrastructure for the community.
Why wasn't that done before, though?
I think because my perception is nobody expected to ever have an event like that. I mean, and if Robert would be sitting here, he'd tell you they're used to CPS Energy being, so reliable that they've never had to worry about that before. But there are some very, very critical large pump stations that keep the entire water system going, and we've got all those identified on our system now. Those are on critical circuits, and unless something catastrophic happens, we lose the grid overall or something, we're going to protect those. We were actually working with SAWS on a resiliency project where they're going to be making some investments in backup generation at those pump stations that they just can't lose.
I'll give you the last word here. We're going to wrap this up. Anything you want to make sure people that are watching this know about Rudy Garza or CPS Energy?
Well, for me, it's, I've been using this concept of one team, both internally and externally. Every one of our, I think I saw last night, we have 2,904 employees today, which is almost 500 employees short of where we need to be. 400 employees short of where we need to be. We're all necessary to do the job that we need to do for the community. But guess what? The community is part of that team too. Whether we're successful or not successful, our city council plays a role in that. Their ability to partner with us in the right ways, them being supportive in our dialogue in the community. Me and Eric Walsh, our city manager, we meet every other week, and we've developed a really, really good relationship. He's part of the team. Ben Gorzel's part of the team. Our board is part of what it takes to be successful. Our customers, at the end of the day, we've got 1.2 million customers that can tell us when that tree in their backyard needs to be trimmed, or when there's a problem out in our system. So in San Antonio, I want our customers to recognize we're all part of the same team. That's one team that it's going to take to ensure that CPS Energy is the best that we can be.
All right, and that was interim CEO of CPS Energy, Rudy Garza. It's a lot to unpack there. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. But we also spoke with District 7 Councilwoman Ana Sandoval. Her district was actually one of the hardest hit during last year's storm. Yeah,
and she made her frustrations during that storm with CPS Energy and the city very clear. During this conversation, Sandoval described what she and her constituents went through during that time and what happens now.
Well, Councilwoman, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Right off the top, obviously we're looking back a year. When you think of how the power outages affected your district, people in your district, yourself, what comes to mind?
It was a really difficult few days. I think it was terrible for so many people to go through that, and we still hear people talking about it today. It's a year later, but I mean, what I recall is people not knowing what to do when their power would come on for 1 minute and then go off, and there was absolutely nothing they could do with that power. It was entirely useless to them, and no one could explain to them why that was happening. Even I couldn't. As much as I called the people I knew at CPS, as far as they knew on their end, they were doing the 15-minute rolling outages, and it didn't end up translating on the ground to that. So I would say that was one of the horrible things people remember, and of course, being cold.
When you look back, are you comfortable that CPS has made the changes they needed to make, that won't happen again?
Well, not all the changes have been made yet. Some of them are dependent on the rate increase that just passed and that will go into effect in March. So I think they are on the right track. But I will tell you, some of it depends on CPS, but a lot of it will also depend on the coordination with the city and what we're doing. We are also on the right track. We just heard an update on that. But there's a big unknown out there, and that is, what is the state going to do? As far as we know, the state hasn't made any substantive changes to the way it operates the grid, and that leaves all of us vulnerable. As much as CPS or the city will do, until the state takes it seriously, we're all at risk.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit more about that, us being more at risk. I mean, what can you tell your constituents about that? Because that is the big question. After last year's disaster, you have a lot of people, who have PTSD. They're worried that just last week, when those temperatures dipped, you had people who were really worried that we were going to have another situation like that. What can you tell them? I mean, do you think this will never happen again, or?
So I think it could happen again, but that the response, until the state acts, I think it can't happen again. But I believe that the response that you'll see on the ground will be much more coordinated, so that while people will be inconvenienced, they will, hopefully, if everything goes well, receive the help they need at the time that they need it. In other words, not going without water, not having access to heat or a heated place, not having access to transportation to get to a warming center. I believe those things we are well on our way to overcoming with what the city and CPS are coordinating.
When it comes to communication, can both CPS Energy and the city do a better job if it happens again?
They have to do a better job when this happens again. Storms are becoming more extreme. We will see something like this or just as shocking as this to our system. The question is, how quickly will we be able to recover? And communication is a critical part of that. Without that, you can't hobble together the reaction, the response, and the help that you need. So I think you also have changing administrations, right, in CPS and the city. And that's why you need to memorialize or put something in procedure so that everyone plays from the same playbook. But in terms of communication, they have worked, the staff has presented to us on improved communication strategies. And also, what can you do when your cell phone isn't working and you are, the head of CPS or the head of the city trying to get a hold of one another? Both organizations have committed to work out of our emergency operations center in the event that something like that happens. So they seem like simple things, but I think they will make just a tremendous difference in the event of an emergency.
Could you give more specific examples as far as those communication strategies that you're saying that now the city has agreed upon? I mean, does that mean that there's more of a firm protocol in place so that when we know if we're going to get a freeze again or something like that, the city knows exactly what to do?
Yes, so for example, who is on the list of receiving a communication when something like this happens? That list is being drawn up and pulled together. So CPS will identify who needs to be on their team, SAWS will identify, and the city is identifying whether it's council members or maybe some of their staff.
Do you agree, though, that the city also should get some of the blame for the lack of communications?
So I've been trained in the world of public health where it's not about blame, it's about how do we solve the problem. Do I think the city has a role to play in making sure we don't have the same consequences next time? Absolutely. I think we have the tools at our disposal and that we also have a responsibility to our residents.
Yeah.
And what are you doing as an elected official, just because it's almost been a year since this happened? Are you asking CPS the tough questions to make sure that they're on track to deliver for their customers?
Sure. So I sit on the Municipal Utilities Committee, so we get an update from CPS, from SAWS, and the city on their status in implementing the recommendations that came out of the group that I was a part of, which was the Committee on Emergency Preparedness that I asked the mayor to pull together after the storm. I felt it was important to not just have CPS and SAWS do their own thing, but the council members, because we were involved as well, we bear some responsibility, and members of the community. So we had retired General Rice was on there. We had an attorney, Lisa Tatum. So making sure that those recommendations are seen to completion. That's part of my job.
One of the big reasons that this happened last year is because these utility companies didn't winterize their equipment. Is that something that you believe CPS has done? So taken care of by now.
They have a strategy to take care of it.
But they haven't done it yet.
They have not. My understanding is that the money from the rate increase that will go into effect in March will also be used to complete that work.
So what if we have a freeze in a month?
We will be much better than we were last year. I think there were some basic things that were completed, but it's not entirely complete, is my understanding.
As far as the winterizing, though, that hasn't been, I mean, do you know, is that 15% done? Is that 30% done? Anything like that?
I couldn't give you a number on that.
Was the rate hike vote a tough one for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So it was extremely tough because the community doesn't trust CPS right now to that full extent that they need. So they came to us initially, or the proposal initially was a much higher rate increase, and they really had to scale that back. You know, I couldn't have approved a 10% rate increase. I would have voted no on something like that.
Just the trauma that this community went through a year ago seemed to put CPS on the radar like they had never been before. What do you say to people who are out there who are still worried that this could happen again and will happen again?
Look, in terms of the weather, something will happen again. The question is, how well prepared can we be? And your local government is doing everything they can to help you when that happens again. And we are holding CPS accountable like we haven't before to be prepared for something like that. I will tell you, the role of council interacting with CPS is night and day since the storm has happened. Before, our representative to the CPS board and it continues to be our mayor. Right. And we have someone in finance that works with him. Well, it's a team actually, but now you have the Committee on Emergency Preparedness. You have a Municipal Utilities Committee that is run by Councilman Courage. You have the Rate Advisory Committee that was put together by the mayor, but now is really going to take off. I've been appointed to be the council's liaison to that committee. So I want to make sure that process is as transparent and as productive as possible. I see that as being my role as the liaison.
Do you think that will be more prepared next year?
Yes, I do believe we will be more prepared.
How specifically?
Next year. I think if it had happened this year, we would have been more prepared already. You would have seen an effort to communicate in a coordinated fashion much sooner. I think what happened last time, and many things happened last time, but one of the issues that happened last time is that there was no sense of how long that was going to go when it started, and whether it was going to go beyond a simple outage by CPS. So it's very easy for the council or even SAWS to sit back and say, hey, it's just an outage, CPS has it under control. But as that prolonged and cascaded into other effects, everyone came late, right, to act on those. So I don't think you would see that again. I think people would be at the ready.
So that's the interview. We're about to go in depth with our power panel that I'll introduce in a second here. We also want to thank all of you who have been interactive with the hashtag Steph and Steve. I want to thank David and Olivia and Grizzly who have reached out with questions that we're going to try to get to tonight. But right now, let's first get to the power panel, a distinguished group here who have joined us. Joining us on Zoom is Ed Hurst. He's a professor of vitality economics at the University of Houston. And we're also joined by DeMonte Alexander, a public affairs consultant. Those two gentlemen are joining us on Zoom.
Also joining us this evening in the studio is KSAT Defender's investigative reporter Dylan Collier. He's done numerous investigative reports into CPS Energy after last year's storm. But now we want to start with
Emmy award-winning investigative reporter. I want to point that out.
Can't forget that.
Yeah.
Now we want to go to Professor Ed. Let's start with you. When you were watching that interview with Rudy Garza, is there anything you heard that stood out to you?
Yeah, Rudy's the new interim CEO, so he really doesn't have to apologize for past mistakes. CPS Energy was not prepared, as were most of the utilities across the state. The 2011 freeze that we had, there were very specific mandates suggested, if you will, by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for weatherizing utilities, and CPS obviously didn't pick up on those. It's fascinating. You could go west on I-10 to El Paso Electric, and they were just fine. They were weatherized. The grids that are around Texas that are subject to federal regulation, sure, they were hit by the same weather, but they responded pretty well. But it's fascinating because listening to Garza and the councilwoman, they have identified the real problem. And that's if the price goes up at the meter, politicians are not reelected. And, she rejected out of hand a 10% rate increase. For more than a decade, people have been poor-boying this whole approach. Penny wise, pound foolish. You have to pay for reliability. You have to make up your minds that you're going to have a grid that's reliable, that's not going to kill people, that's not going to cut off your water, that's not going to endanger health care and services, traffic lights, getting fuel out of the ground. And so until San Antonio comes to grips with providing a basic commodity service and paying for it, you're going to have a real problem.
Professor, I want to talk to you about renewables coming up, but first I want to move to our next guest, DeMonte Alexander. You're in the public relations sphere. You're a community builder. Do you think people will be satisfied with what Rudy Garza had to say? And I want to couch that with this. Fairfax did a poll that showed CPS Energy took a huge hit in the first quarter of last year. I believe we have the graphics here. Its approval rating was 77% in April of 2020. By the fourth quarter of last year, it was down to somewhere in the 44% range. What does CPS Energy need to do to win the public's trust again? And was what Rudy Garza said tonight a step in that direction? DeMonte.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve and Steph, for the opportunity. Look, I think what Rudy did in the interview was the first step, is admitting where they had mistakes in that fall, right? That's the first step in the crisis. And I don't think it's not much of what Rudy said tonight. I think it's what we felt with the current, when we just came out of a new storm, the next storm was, the communication was better. The flow of communication and what they communicated to you and how they communicated. You can tell that there was a unified effort between all of our utilities and the city. So it was much better. Is that enough for the public? I don't know. That's on the backs of a rate increase as well. Now, you'd have to be someone that's in the weeds in terms of why rate increases are required or needed versus someone who just doesn't understand why we do rate increases. And so I can't speak to the public and say that's what he did enough, but from what I felt and from what I've seen, I think they're taking a step in the right direction for sure. But I'm happy that he did admit where they were at fault and there was some room some room for them to improve. But look, I'm not an energy expert, but I am a parent. I'm someone that was at home with a 2-month-old baby and no water, no electricity. I had to keep her bottles in the snow outside. Thank God it snowed. And then I had to warm up her bottle to feed her by candlelight. So if you want to talk about someone who was angry, I was angry. And just like the 1.3 million people, or the people, the amount of people that were affected, we're all angry. Yes, we're angry. And there's blame to be thrown around, not just with CPS Energy, with a lot of different agencies as well. But I do agree with Anna Sandoval. We can't get in the blame game. We have to figure out how to provide solutions to these problems so they don't happen again. And so from what I've seen, I'm very happy to see that everyone's working in a collaborative way. But one thing that and I'll end it here, in the military, they teach us to always train and be ready. And so I hear them saying we never could foresee this happening, but you always have to be testing yourself for the what if scenarios, especially when you have people's lives and employment and all those different things at stake. And so that's some things I hope they improve on, is just some proactive training, which I'm hearing that Rudy and the guys are. And another thing is, we keep forgetting about the workers. Yeah, we lost power, but there are over 2,500 employees that are still behind that CPS Energy brand. Some of those guys are out there on those poles at 19-degree weather, trying to fix the lights and get those back on. So I think, yes, this is a difficult moment for CPS Energy and those in this space. But I think we also have to think about those workers that are out there working to help us get those lights back on and keep our water on, those types of things. So that's just my take on it.
A company that's bigger than just Rudy Garza, what you're pointing out there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, DeMonte, you got to something just a moment ago. You were talking about, since we asked you for your public relations input, what the community thinks about this. And now we want to go to Dylan Collier, because it's one thing to sit in front of officials, ask them questions, grill them, and then another thing to speak with the public who was very much affected by this. What are you hearing from them?
A year ago, CPS Energy was very much in the background. You would hear them come up every year during the city budget because they contribute so much money to the city finances. But I think in this era of extreme weather shifts, people are demanding that this really be a forward-facing company, that the leader of the organization be out there publicly during these meetings about storm preps. I think gone are the days where the president and CEO of CPS Energy can literally phone it in for an important meeting before Commissioner's Court. The public will not tolerate that any longer.
Yeah, and that's a big change. I mean, and a lot of people also forget, okay, they were doing Zoom press conferences, which, are pretty impersonal to begin with, but then the then CEO and president of CPS Energy would often have her camera off during those press conferences. I mean, communication was there, but it was lacking, in my opinion.
It was the minimum amount of information that needed to be put out there publicly. And I mean, we've heard it over and over again tonight. That just cannot happen anymore. The leaders of this organization have to be out there publicly. They need to be able to have a two-way communication system where they're not only telling the public information, but the public is able to ask them about certain situations. Just because, as Councilwoman Sandoval said, I mean, this could happen every year now, these extreme, day after day of sub-freezing temperatures.
Dylan, we got more questions for you. Oh, go ahead, DeMonte.
Well, I think Anna Sandoval said something important, right? And it's about being transparent and productive. And in the midst of we were dealing with the pandemic as well, so we can't forget that. But on top of that, we're all going through this tough time, but being more transparent about what's going on, what's happening, as far as what you understand and how the public can keep themselves safe, and also being productive about the problem and not waiting to, there's a problem, let's fix it. And so I think those are the two words that really stood out to me in terms of what she talked about and also what interim CEO Rudy Garza talked about. Just being transparent and productive, that goes a long way with the public.
I want to get to the professor that is with us from Houston, and this is a question we actually got with the hashtag Steph and Steve on Twitter. So Ed, I want to ask you this question. Why didn't the governor prohibit price gouging on natural gas as he did with other prices? The Texas legislature also had a chance to do so after the fact, but chose not to. Is this because they hold stock in the companies supplying the natural gas? I'm just kind of lobbing that one in there to you, Professor.
That's an absolutely wonderful question. I don't have the answer. Attorney General Ken Paxton, of course, went after La Quinta for marking up a hotel room and extracted a very significant settlement for La Quinta. He doesn't appear to want to go after the natural gas providers. The equivalent there would be, say, taking gasoline from $3 a gallon to $900 a gallon and closing 40 of the pumps at the 100 pump station. There are a lot of investigations underway. It's not just state investigations, but federal investigations. And we won't know the outcome for, maybe a couple of years.
I want to thank David on Twitter for that question.
Yeah. Thank you for that, David. Now, Dylan, we have a question for you. We also asked Rudy about the several lawsuits. I believe he mentioned 18 lawsuits that CPS Energy filed and going after energy providers. Now, recently, we know this happened just a few days ago. The Fourth Court of Appeals dismissed CPS Energy's lawsuit against ERCOT, and then CPS Energy appealed to the Texas Supreme Court.
Right.
What kinds of things are you going to be looking out for?
In that suit, looked at whether or not, especially the appeal, looked at whether or not This was an issue, this overcharging of energy companies during the storm was an issue that should have been taken up before the Public Utilities Commission and not even in a court of law. So that will be what the Texas Supreme Court takes a look at with this petition that was filed by CPS Energy at the end of last month, as you said just a few days ago. There are a few things about this case that really stand out. The fact of the matter that it's already before the Texas Supreme Court less than a year after it was filed. I mean, we've seen cases, police arbitration cases, wrongful death lawsuits against local universities over sovereign immunity. Sometimes it takes years to get those before the Texas Supreme Court. This one took about 10 months to get up to the Texas Supreme Court, which is a big deal for CPS Energy because they have spent a ton of money litigating the ERCOT lawsuit alone. And in November, we had a story, the defenders released it, $7 million in attorney and consultant fees related to this storm litigation. About half of that was for the law firm representing them in the ERCOT lawsuit. So it's very important for CPS Energy to try and get this thing before the Supreme Court, get a ruling from them, and then decide what they're going to do from there, because this lawsuit especially is costing a lot of money.
So yesterday on our KSAT Q&A, which airs at 6:30, we had Russell Gold. He's an energy expert. He's a writer for Texas Monthly, an editor there. He wrote an article about the freeze and where we stand. Basically, no matter how bad we think last year was, it could have been worse. He says instead of losing power for days, it could have been weeks. He thought we were just minutes away from the entire grid going down. He said ERCOT is better now than it was a year ago, but he also said, no, we're not ready. I have not talked to anybody who thinks we're ready should the same thing happen again. DeMonte, what does the public make of that?
Well, I mean, when it comes to whether we're ready for the grid, I think just the general public, again, doesn't get in the weeds with that stuff. I think what people are worried about is, paying the bills, right? Seems electricity bills seem to keep going up, water bills seem to be going up, and so I think what needs to happen here is, like when we talked about the 77% before, CPS Energy was partnering with community organizations like Rudy talked about, trying to find those communities that are disconnected from just basic services and finding ways to connect with them. CPS Energy used to do a lot of rebate programs passing out light bulbs, and just being very, very involved in the community. So I think when it comes to understanding complexities of energy, I think we can't expect the general public, and not saying the public isn't smart, I'm just saying that that's a really complex issue, even for myself to understand. But I think from the public standpoint and from a PR standpoint, just continue to engage this community in the ways they were before. Like Rudy said, they're still the same team there. Just a year, a little over a year and a half ago, this community, CPS Energy was the highest polled in terms of favorability in this community. That's still, what he said, 20, they lost some other employees, but that's still, majority of those employees are still there working hard every day for this community. Again, I'm someone who is angry and upset about that, but I think we have to be fair and understand the complexity of the whole situation. Mm-hmm. So continue to engage this community in the ways they've always done, and also just find ways for cost savings for residents who desperately need it. And I think that will put them on a path to regaining that trust that has been lost.
Now, Professor, we want to go to you, and we'll let you have the final word here. The main reason, obviously, that we're doing this show is because we need to know whether we are prepared for another weather disaster like this. And this is right in your wheelhouse. You've looked at this extensively. In fact, you wrote an op-ed for The Hill last year, and you questioned whether the Lone Star State would be the blackout state. Bottom line, are we ready? I know that renewables also factor into this.
We're not ready. I mean, to be honest, it takes more than 8 to 12 months to fix something that's been in decay for 10 years. And I pointed out that this market was, on the road to hell in 2013, that the structures were wrong. To the extent that CPS has to rely upon ERCOT, this is not a good backup plan. The Public Utility Commission has not really changed the rules of the market. The generators aren't going to be earning a rate of return. There's no incentive for reinvestment and investment. In fact, there's an incentive for gaming the market. Dylan, you were talking about the lawsuit and the Supreme Court. State Senator Kelly Hancock, on at least 2 occasions, has said that they found conflicts of interest with the commissioners on the Public Utility Commission and the board members of ERCOT. I haven't seen any reporting on that. but that would tend to indicate there's more investigation required. It may rise to the level of criminal investigations, and that would take it right out of the hands of the Texas Supreme Court. Going forward, the issues with renewable, the first thing the governor said, bless his heart, was, wind and solar failed. It was 1:38 in the morning, Governor. The sun doesn't shine at 1:38 in the morning. If there's a problem with wind and solar, Governor, it's because all of your appointees brought these generators onto the grid. They don't get on the grid without the approval of the personal appointees of the governor. And that goes back the last 20 years to Governor Bush. This problem, we have been 4 years, 5 years behind California, but we're following them in lockstep. We've destabilized this grid with a lack of investment. And now we're pushing and pushing to go to more variable resources. And that, of course, takes away from volatility. One of the public utility commissioners just a couple of weeks ago actually asked the question in an open meeting, are consumers going to have to be signing new contracts every 2 months because of the price volatility that this is going to bring to the overall ERCOT market? This is nonsense. We need electricity to manage the grid. I pointed out that 26 million people without power for weeks at a time. I mean, we couldn't fix Puerto Rico. How many Berlin airlifts would Texas need to keep 26 million people in water and food until we could restart the grid? I mean, these are really big issues.
And things that we're going to continue to talk about. We're going to have to leave it right there. We want to thank our power panel for joining us today. We loved having you on and having just that you guys shared your insights with us. Thank you for joining us for our first episode of The Breakdown with Steph and Steve.
Absolutely. And we want to thank all of you that took part in the interactive part of this and shared your questions with us. We hope we got them all answered. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.